Well, it is 10 o'clock, so I say let's get started because I know that we are all really busy and we have a lot to get done. As Stacy was just saying, the governor has given us 8 days to build a brand new system, revolutionary system of education. My name is Erin Anderson. I'm the Director of Charter School Authorizing for the Audubon Center of the Northwoods, which I suspect for most of you on this call is your school's charter school authorizer. I'm really excited to have you here and to be able to welcome educators from Crosslake Community School in Crosslake, Minnesota, which is about a half an hour outside of Brainerd. They are the only online program in our portfolio, and they reached out with an incredible offer to help support all of the teachers and educators in our portfolio with this eLearning Basics webinar to help you really begin to build the tools that you need to deliver distance learning to your students. We're going to focus today on e-learning, and tomorrow we have a couple more webinars focused on special education, as well as serving learners ages kind of 3 to 8 is what we're looking at, pre-K kids as well as K2. So today we've got Emily Phil Richardson as well as Stacy Bender from Crosslake. Again, I'm sure you've been on lots of these Zoom meetings this week. We are recording this. We're going to start with kind of a traditional presentation and then have lots of time for questions at the end. So I hope you brought those with you. We're going to be monitoring the chat box, so please feel free to use that. I'll try and mute on the side so we don't have a lot of background noise, but if you're calling in, also please remember to mute yourself so there's not a lot of background noise so that everybody can hear. And let's see, is there anything else? Any other nuts and bolts type things? I don't think so. With that, I want to turn it over to Stacy and Emily, and thank you so much for hosting, and thank you to everybody for being here. We're really grateful for your time.
It's so great to be here, and thank you again for just giving us this opportunity to serve you. So thank you for trusting us with this. My name is Stacy Bender. I'm the director of the online program at Crosslake Community School, and I will not be talking much. I have bronchitis, and also I look like crap, so I'm not even gonna let you see me. No, I'm just kidding. I'm okay. Here, I'll let you see me for a second. But I cough. And Emily will talk most of the time. Just let me know if there's anything that you need me to jump in on, but the less I use this voice, the better, because it's a long day.
Okay, well, thank you, Stacy, and everyone for being here. Just a quick note, I've been in online education for about 10 years, over 10 years, and also worked at the U as an instructional designer and technologies consultant for professors there. So I have a lot of experience, and sometimes that's good and sometimes that's bad because I don't know where to start to be the most helpful. We'll do a little check-in just so I can kind of get an idea of our audience here. Let's see, and then I just have to, oh, there we go, resume. All right. So just where is everyone right now? Like, are you completely lost? Are you just still really kind of racked with grief because you're not going to see your students? You can choose more than one. More than one is also an option. Type in the chat box.
And to have St. Paul to look at the way it does today, compared to how it's like a I like it when we say, am I right?
All of the above. Yeah, it's a big new charter school startup. All right. Yeah. It's a big space and scary space to be in right now, just with all the different emotions and feelings. And so the presentation part is going to actually focus on some theory, and because they're really just 2 main points, but I think it's going to ground you and give you some solid guidance with all the decisions that you're going to have to make. And then check-in pod, just a quick check-in on how your comfort level with technology right now. Like, I adopted Schoology when it first came out, or I've been using Blackboard for 20 years, or my grandkids just showed me how to use Gmail. First year teachers, okay, awesome. Not what you had signed up for, but excellent. Okay, and we'll get into a little bit more of the technology side of things, but again, I really want to ground you in some of just a couple important key ideas with distance and e-learning. Yeah, right, grow capacity quickly. Okay, and then last but not least, I did another one, just where are you in education, like grade level, teachers, administrators, lots of teachers, board member, okay, great. High school, okay, a big mix. And so that'll be different too. Again, kind of why I'm starting with these principles, because when it gets down to individual school needs and teacher needs, they're gonna look different when you implement them, but they're all gonna be stemming from the same place. Okay, so the presentation may not even take that long. I just give some buffer in there. But I wanted to address a little bit of jargon because I know some people had some questions about language when it comes to online learning and online tools. And then there will be, usually I'll pause for questions for each segment. We'll talk a little bit about distance learning theory, thinking about our different needs, and then some different strategies in the broad sense again. And then what I'm really hoping with this community and group is that we can start forming some groups that'll have specific strategies for your different, like, elementary teachers, or you know, groups that are planning to do more of a distance style learning and rely less on Google Classroom and technologies and things like that. And then time for lots of questions, because I'm sure there are a lot of questions about MDE, distance, you know, distance learning plan, and I know attendance is a huge one, and other things. So we should have plenty of time for that too. Okay, so a few jargon terms people were wondering about. Oh, okay, you're talking to someone else, sorry. Oh, you can't hear the speaker. Are other people having problems?
Emily, you seem to be fine. We're trying to troubleshoot. Don't worry about you just keep going.
All right.
I'll interrupt you.
No, that's fine. So synchronous means occurring at the same time. So it's happening in real time. And you use these personally, like chat, text, phone calls, video conferences. What we're doing now is synchronous. And so all schools, I think, will be using a mix of synchronous and then asynchronous tools, which they're occurring at different times. So email, I mean, sometimes you're emailing back and forth, but a lot of times there's time between responses. A discussion board, whether you've done that for school or for like a personal interest, like I'm really into knitting, and there are knitting discussion boards out there in groups. Or just if you think about traditional education, giving grading feedback on student work, you know, they turn it in, you know, it's a few days, a week, depending, like I said, a big project, when you give that grading feedback. So synchronous, same time, asynchronous, there's a lapse in time between the two. Okay. Cognitive load. I'm going to be referring to this a lot because it's something that when you're choosing what to do with your classes and classrooms and teachers and families, it's going to be really important for everyone's well-being to think about cognitive load. which is the brain's working memory. And usually they say you can handle, they say 7 plus or minus 2 kind of new ideas. In general, in like K-12 education, I generally say 5 plus or minus 2. And then with our current situation, everyone's trying to scale up in e-learning. You know, families don't even know exactly what's happening yet. Really probably that -2. So really think about simplifying things, keeping things in small chunks, because our brains are going to be managing a lot, just trying to figure out, you know, logging into different learning management systems or content providers, or do I need to drive a packet into school and drop it off, and changes in family environment and everything. So when you make decisions, think about, you know, cognitive load and trying to keep that manageable. Are there terms that people have been reading about as you're trying to scale up in online learning, or ideas that you don't really you've read but don't really know what they mean? Pause time is fun on web conferences. All right, I'll move on because I know lots of questions. So this is the, yes, great, distance learning versus e-learning. Thank you. That was something that I wanted to bring up, and brings us to this next segment. So distance learning, yeah, remote learning, I would put that more in the distance learning category. Goes way back. Like, think of, you know, 1940s correspondence courses for, you know, GIs in the military. Like, distance theory has been around for a long time in education, and that's kind of the original. That's where online learning got its start, because once more people had internet access, and it's a great way to transmit information quickly. Basically, online learning just adapted a lot of ideas from distance learning. And then people realized there are other affordances, other things you can do in an online environment, and it kind of grew from there. And so in general, I'd say the big difference, if you're thinking about more of a distance learning type, you can rely less on technologies. Like, we can talk about different situations, but, you know, if like, I live in rural Wisconsin, and our school is going to be having us once a week drive to and from the school to drop off and pick up materials. That would be a distance model. So they're printing off a lot of materials. Families don't have printers at home. All of our families might not have computers in rural Wisconsin, and so that's more purely distance, whereas an online or e-learning would be making use of Google Classroom and Gmail, and knowing that most of your families have internet access and some sort of computer or laptop that they could use, and doing the majority of your interactions and content online. I'm just going to pause, see if there are any questions.
Emma, I'm just going to jump in
Yeah.
while people might ask questions. This is Stacy, Director of Online Programming. To be really clear, the directive from the commissioner is to develop a distance learning plan. And that's kind of the line, right? That schools have to have that as the minimum. And so when Emily was talking about that, the packet program, or, you know, those sorts of things, that's the minimum. And we're all welcome to have that. That's what the commissioner has said. Somehow kids need to be able to access school while they're at home and not seeing their teachers every day, if that's what needs to happen. Anything that Emily's talking about today is kind of the next step up. So kind of how do you scale up from that? Right. So if packets are kind of where your district or your charter wants to go, the commissioner is fine with that. I don't know what Aaron's directive is to you all, but we really want to provide you with the tools to be able to step up that a little bit more if that's what you want. And then I just want to, while we're waiting maybe for a thought I had is I want to just remind everybody that approved online learning providers in the state, when we go through the process with the state, we have like a year of planning and process that we have to do. You guys have been given 8 days. So I just want to remind everybody that the task is huge. You don't have to do it all by Monday. You can have a plan in place and then you can scale up if we need to continue. We just want to give you the theory background so that the more you want to do, the more you want to be prepared for. If you have some early adopters who really want to grab onto that, that's what we really want to provide for you. So thanks, Em. Back to you.
Thanks, Stacy. And even what we're talking about will apply to distance models and just help you make better choices when you're making all of those decisions. So they're just two really brief theories. They're not complicated. You'll see them and be like, oh, that makes sense, I think. But it's probably just something you might not have thought of before. So in transactional distance theory, that the idea is that it's not just a geographic difference, but that it's kind of a teaching theory as well. There's a pedagogy, because you're not there to immediately make corrections or see that a student's needs to kind of take a different learning path. So there's distance physically, but also in the pedagogy. And so, and that even happens in face-to-face settings. So there are 3 parts to it. The first is structure, which is basically the organization of the course and instruction. So you can think of it either as the organization of, if you're using Google Classroom or Schoology or Canvas, that's a structural component. Or again, if you're doing over a distance kind of packet, the structure would be, the daily schedule that you have students, roughly following, instructions for, how to proceed with assignments and activities and things like that. And then there is learner autonomy, which basically is the student or the learner's self-directedness and their ability to be an autonomous learner for the most part. And in K-12 education, I would say in general that learner autonomy is pretty low. There are some exceptional students, but our students are going to need more. They're not as autonomous as a really motivated adult who wants to, become a master gardener or whatever that situation is. And so the thing that joins them and kind of bridges the gap is dialogue. And there are 2 ways to think about the dialogue. One is dialogue between the instructor and the student, and that includes any sort of communication like email, phone calls, a short video explaining things, written instructions, so any sort of dialogue or communication between the instructor and the student. And then also dialogue between the student and the learning materials. So if you think of it like a graphic organizer or guiding questions that you have students answer, while they're reading, a chapter of Where the Red Fern Grows or that sort of thing. So dialogue between the student and the teacher, and then dialogue between the student and the content. And the the point of that I really want to, I guess, drive home is that the lower the autonomy and the less structure you have, the more important that dialogue piece is. So as you're thinking about your plans, as you're thinking about, you know, how you're going to reach students and what, you know, what's really important, it's that communication piece. You'll get tired of hearing me say that. Any questions about that first theory? This next one will be pretty short because it's similar, but just a different way. Okay, well, I'll keep an eye on the chat. So interaction equivalence theory is basically thinking about how do we create deep and meaningful learning with our students. And so there are three forms of interaction, starting with a student. So there's interactions between the student and the teacher. There are interactions between the student and the content. So kind of like in that previous example, creating dialogue between the student and the content. And then there's student-to-student interactions. And so, you know, again, in this situation, there's going to be much less students-to-student interaction. You know, it's still possible, but it's not where your focus should be. The theory is that as long as one of those interactions is of a high level, you can have a quality learning experience. So again, we're going to be really focusing on that decisions and choices and activities that support the teacher-student dialogue and relationship. Oh. Yeah, so yeah, dialogue is key. Student collaboration, that really depends on what resources you as a district, you as families, you as teachers have. So there are definitely opportunities for collaboration if you, for example, I could see it in a high school that's already using Schoology or Google Classroom and students are familiar with it. But you could also have lower distance levels of collaboration, or maybe not, collaboration isn't the best word, interaction. You could have students write, you know, a note or a letter to another student in the class, or again, coordinating with other teachers. You've got a lot on your plate. You could, you know, have sixth graders write a letter to the second graders or things like that. But the collaboration is going to be tough if you're doing pretty much a purely distance model. Also with the 6 feet away and social distancing. But if you already have resources that families and students are familiar with, like different learning platforms, then I think you can certainly make use of that. Okay. All right, so here's the reality check, and I said this to Stacy the other day, is really thinking about what, you know, the call for quality education for our students, you know, trying to build into or develop up into, I don't want to say up because that implies a hierarchy, develop into e-learning and online learning. But the reality is that some of our families are going to have 4 kids at home, some and probably don't have 4 computers. So again, these aren't specific answers for you right now, but just to think about, it looks like I wrote on the whiteboard. Oh well, you know, teachers, like what resources do you have? Where are your teachers at? You know, if they're first year teachers, they're already their cognitive load is like maxed out. So please keep that in mind. And again, we can provide quality education for our students, but we also need to have realistic expectations. And then think about your students. A second grader is going to be very different than a high schooler on that learning autonomy from the distance model. Again, high schoolers still need a lot of assistance, but the second grader might not be reading yet. So that's going to really change how you approach your education choices. Families, I kind of already mentioned it. And then just technologies with a small t. They don't have to be big or fancy or expensive. If you have the G Suite for Education, that's great. Like, I think that's a great place to be. If you know that your families don't have a lot of or don't have access to internet and or reliable internet, I should say, and computers, then small technologies like your printer, school printer, and photocopier and things like that. So we don't need to always be thinking about the sexy technology. I'm pausing to take a look at questions. There are any. Okay. I'm pausing here to see if anyone read through or had questions about the e-learning kind of dinner party analogy. It's a work in progress. It was trying to get a lot of ideas out in a way that might be more relatable. But if people haven't looked at that, or like that doesn't really help me, that's fine. We can just move on. Reddit, yeah. So the idea is kind of going back to the cognitive load. If you're new to e-learning or even distance learning, it's a lot to take in. And one way that we can reduce cognitive load is to relate the new information to something people are already familiar with. Awesome. And so the idea is to think about preparing for e-learning or distance learning like you would think about hosting a dinner party, and kind of almost thinking of it like your students are maybe used to Kruger's or Chipotle, or like getting quality, like nutritious food, but in this kind of different format. And now you're inviting them maybe to a sit-down dinner that requires chopsticks or something. So there are things that translate, and there are things that are going to take a little bit of extra thought and preparation for it to be successful. But to also think that it doesn't have to be scary. You're not serving some big 4-course French meal with like 20 forks and 5 different wine glasses and things like that. Yes. So kind of starting thinking about, whoops, that's me, an invitation. You let people know, please come to this dinner party. You also kind of let them know, is it dressy, is it casual, is it potluck? You give them some context, right? So letting families and students know, this is what we're doing. And I think I have an example, like welcome letter or introduction to this reboot of school in the spring of 2020, and set some expectations. Again, try and chunk the information into portions that are manageable. So the welcome letter doesn't need to have everything in it, but that it's reassuring, is clear, and lets people know what to expect. And that kind of helps you as the teacher also kind of settle in and articulate some things. And then I don't have the document up right here, so I'm trying to remember what was next. I think it was planning the environment. So thinking about your house doesn't have to be perfect when you have people over for dinner. Like, it's okay, there's a pile of laundry behind the door. It's okay that you didn't vacuum the, family room downstairs. There are just a few essential things that you need to think about. And then I tried to outline what those are in an e-learning environment. Yeah. So I think unless there's a specific question related to it right now, I'm going to move on because I think some of you have some really specific questions that you want to get to, and I want to honor that. But we'll also have time for more questions about that analogy later. So this one, these are just things to keep in mind, and I'm going to go through them pretty quickly, I think. The first one is simplicity. Again, getting to the cognitive load, which is please, for everyone, keep it simple. Do not use tons of bright colors and different fonts and trying to make it fun. It's going to detract from your message, from the dialogue and from the student learning outcomes that you're trying to focus on. So there are certainly ways you can make it fun. Someone posted something about a short video if you have that capacity. I would say if you're looking for fun things, do it in the activities or the learning or the social interactions. But everything else, try and keep it simple. Also keep in mind that this is going to be like the beginning of the year with new classroom procedures. You're going to have to remind students and families, this is where we're doing things. This is how we're taking attendance. This is where, how I want you to turn in your work. When you send an email with a question, please include the name of the assignment, or like the subject matter and name of the assignment. And so that's just an important thing to keep in mind. And if you can kind of incorporate that into your, first few weeks of education, I think down the road, it'll be better for everyone. We'll just make it smoother. Really leverage asynchronous strategies, so those ones that don't occur at the same time, because we don't know what families are going through. I mean, I have 2 kids at home. My husband is working from home. We have an incontinent elderly dog, and if both kids had to have meetings with their teachers at a certain time, and it would be overwhelming. So while there are lots of benefits to doing things synchronously, they should be optional or recorded, and then the meat of what you are doing should be focused on those asynchronous interactions. Social presence is kind of that dialogue piece I was talking about. It's what we work really, really hard at in a purely online setting. And everyone is going to be way ahead of the game because you've been developing relationships with these students and families, since the beginning of the school year, or even since winter break. And so the really important thing is to make choices that develop that support it, that nurture it, and create a space for that communication, and knowing that my teachers are there. They still care about me, and they still, want to hear the silly joke that I read off the popsicle stick, that sort of thing. So please dedicate time or incorporate that into your activities and plans, because that's going to be important both for the teachers and the students. Use the deli. Please don't feel like you have to create everything on your own now. You will go insane. So wherever you can find prepared content, please use it. There's nothing wrong with that. You are going to be doing a lot of other types of work. You won't be managing a classroom. You don't have to get students, to stand in line and put on their boots and coats and snow pants and hats for recess. So, focus on those communication pieces, on giving feedback to students, thinking about the student learning outcomes, the activities and assignments that you can do to support those, but don't feel like you have to be making your own materials now. Yes, so back to the less synchronous activities and schedules. There's a little bit about that in the analogy, but yes, having a schedule is great. And I think please create one for yourself and create one for your students and families. Build in wiggle room. So you are not going to be filling 8 hours or 7.5 hours of the day as an online teacher, like sitting in front of your webcam or on the phone. And students aren't going to be doing that either. So if you can make, chunks, blocks of time. I saw a note from our director who had suggested, I think it came from a conversation with the commissioner, maybe you alternate subjects each day. So maybe, again, this depends on your grade level. So, but maybe one day is, math and art and reading, and another day is writing and social studies and science and music. Or you don't have to do all the things in one day. But giving guidelines of when to do them will be helpful, especially, you as a teacher, if you're getting lots of questions about the same thing, you can kind of redirect your students because they'll be, working on math at approximately the same time. But again, these are, unprecedented circumstances. So not everyone's going to be able to follow that schedule every day. Yep. Yes, so we have some models for teacher office hours. I might let Stacy handle social workers, support staff, admin stuff, because I don't usually have to deal with that. But in general, our teachers have, if they're a full-time teacher, about 4 hours of office hours a day. And it's not filled with calls or video conferences or responding quickly to emails. It varies. But in the schedule, I think a sample schedule, obviously you do what works for you. I think I had a couple hours in the morning and then a couple in the afternoon. And then just so you have availability at both points in the day. Thank you. Okay, just-in-time teaching. A lot of you probably already do this, like thinking about exit slips, I think will be really helpful. That's kind of the main just-in-time model that I was thinking of, but to kind of check in on where they are will be really important. Again, it's going to support that communication and dialogue, and it's going to help you know where they are on those, on your student learning outcomes and objectives. So you know, the kind of exit slip of, you know, what was most confusing about this today, or, you know, one new thing you learned about ecosystems, or, you know, it doesn't, small, you know, again, that manageable bite size, but it'll give you some quick feedback that you can then use, you know, a day or two later. You might alter your schedule a little bit or change a few of your assignments based on what the feedback that you're getting from those exit slips.
Emily, there was a question about how much time you're spending with each child. Do you have a sense for that, or is that something that kids just sort of like opt in as families or kids feel like they need it? What's your response to that?
Yes, it is. It varies, and Stacy can talk to this too if she has a voice, but you're going to find that students and families are in very different situations. So some students might have, you know, family members who are, you know, were teachers or people around that can help them, and they're not going to have too many questions. You know, they'll still want to have contact with you as a teacher, but they might not struggle as much. And then you'll have, you know, students and families who this is just overwhelming for them. You know, this massive change and uprooting of their life schedule, I guess, and they're going to need a lot of support. And so I would say you as teachers are going to need to think about giving yourself kind of I don't want to say parameters for those times. Some boundaries are going to become a little harder, and you'll have to think through that a little bit more. And so I recommend thinking about, okay, I'm 15 minutes for max for a call, and then if it's going beyond that, have kind of a something wrote that you can pull up quickly of like, I have another student waiting. I'll look into these 3 things, and then when would be a good time to call you back tomorrow, or that sort of thing. I don't know if that's quite getting at the specific question, but the reality is that the needs are going to be very different, and it's okay if one family and student you're mostly emailing with and call once a week, and another family is calling you like 2 or 3 times a day.
Yeah, I think there have been a lot of questions around, the definition that came out from the Department of Education was they have to receive daily interaction with their licensed teacher. And I think that there has been a lot of question around, does that mean like a teacher has to sit on the phone for 20 minutes every day with every kid? And so I think that's, I don't know, I don't even know who wrote that question, but I think that might be kind of the spirit of it, is like, what does that actually mean?
Yes.
Can I jump in, on
definitely.
that? Mm-hmm. So several years ago, I sat on a task force, or whatever the heck you call stuff at MTE, and it was about being able to use online learning with independent study models, where kids could get earning credits that they missed or whatever, and because there's a seat time requirement. And so one of the things that we proposed, that I don't remember if it went through or not because it was so long ago, and I don't think anybody really ever grabbed onto this really hard, but anyway, one of the proposals was that there was an outreach from the teacher and a response from the student. And so a daily interaction could be a morning meeting style type thing, that if you have Google Classroom or whatever, you could set that up so that it's a discussion board that every student has to respond to, and that's kind of their daily check-in, or an email that goes out, like whatever technology you're trying to use, or the most simplistic form of that. I think that as long as a teacher is doing something to reach out, providing some kind of whatever interaction, morning meeting type thing, and then as long as a student responds to that, that is there. And then we're going to get to attendance later, but that's also that also could count as their attendance, and you could use that as your attendance. So you could set up an advisory, a homeroom, morning meeting, something like that. And if you have technology tools that you're going to have students do, then, you know, doing that. Always thinking about, because you're not an online provider and you're not somebody who's sort of required to make sure that students have technology or that they agreed to have technology, just think in the back of your mind, if a student doesn't have internet access, how would I provide for this? And it could be as simple as you reach out by text and they reach out by responding. And then, just because I may never remember this by the time it gets there, but I thought of it just now when I said text, I am not in any way, shape, or form saying that our teachers should be using their own technology for this. So I sat on a Max meeting this morning and made the point that I'm very, very, very concerned that we are putting our teachers at risk if we are requiring them to use their own technology. Teachers using their own cell phones to, you know, text kids from their personal cell phone numbers. These are not best practices that most of us are using in our schools. And so if there is not already technology in place for staff to be able to text, there are some free options out there, and there are some, you know, free options for phone calls and that sort of thing. There's some free pieces that are not always all that reliable. So like Text Now and whatever, you can do Google searches for that. But I do know that Google Voice used to be free service, and too many of us used it, where they provided phone numbers and texting abilities. It used to be free, but now it's, if you have staff of 10 or under, it is $10 a month. And if it is 11 or more, it's $20 a month, which is totally backwards. But that's my recommendation. And then that is just an app on teachers' phones. And if your teachers don't have phones, you know, just picking up some old cell phones or something like that, if they have Wi-Fi at home, those sorts of things are things you have to think about in your plans. But okay, I'll stop talking now because I totally squirreled there. But and if you want more information about like how we do that, ask it in the question time and I'll address it further.
Great, thanks. There were a couple questions. So Josh had asked about, so a question going back to the just-in-time teaching. If you could circle back, exit slips were an example of just-in-time teaching?
If the exit slips are then followed up with a teaching strategy. So it's like a pulse check on students, where they are with a concept or topic or, you know, idea. And then so you get some quick feedback from the students, and then you realize, oh, they really don't understand this step in photosynthesis, or, oh, yeah, they all know what opportunity costs are in economics. I can move on. So if it's followed up with that change or adjustment or reflection on what you're going to teach next, then it fits that just-in-time teaching model. There's a question about what if students don't respond for that daily check-in, and we can talk a little bit more about that in attendance, if that's okay, because that's coming up very soon, our attendance time. Yeah, Google Voice. Yes, and so again today, like, maybe the theory was not what you were expecting, but I assure you that it's going to be very helpful when you make these decisions, and then we can kind of as a group come up with resources and tools, and then you can kind of put them in those like, oh, this fits with what they said during the video conference. Okay. Oops. This is just a note, like, we don't know what's going to happen with families' technologies. So even if you're doing e-learning and you know, think you can have quick turnover time, please prepare at least 1 week ahead of time if you can. I know that's a lot up front, but if something, you know, if one of your family members gets sick, or you get sick, or you have a family that everyone else can get internet access but they can't, and you have to print stuff off, it'll be really helpful. So that's just a, you know, if you can, that will be great. So the two things that I just wanted to leave you with that you've heard me say over and over again are make choices and design your activities and learn lesson plans so that you are maintaining and nurturing and building dialogue and communication and relationship with your students, and then make choices that are going to reduce the cognitive load for everyone, for teachers, for families, for students. Yeah, and the first couple weeks, if you're using, if you're moving more in this e-learning direction, yeah, it just like the first week of school, like think about how much time is spent on routine and procedure and just revisiting those. This is how we do things. This is, you know, this is when I have office hours, you know, check in with me then, those pieces. So yes, do small, I would say, you know, your learning objectives for students are going to be much lower that first week, even the second week. And then you'll slowly scaffold and build up. Yeah. And then just this, I know it's overwhelming, but this is an opportunity. It's an opportunity for your shy students or students who don't, you know, don't feel comfortable speaking up in class. It's an opportunity for students who are, you know, have health or emotional struggles in school and or because of school, because of those social interactions. It's going to be time, like I said, where you don't have to deal with classroom management. You have to deal with a lot of other stuff. But there, I think, I'm hoping down the road there will be some silver linings in this. Okay. Attendance. Stacy, do you have a voice for attendance or
Yep.
enough voice?
Yep. So yeah, all I'm trying to do is conserve it because it's long work. Okay, so the MDE definition for online learning providers is literally a single login, a single documentable login. So when we're creating our attendance plans, we have to figure out, when we write for the online learning provider application, we have to just state how that will be accounted for. Okay, so you again could use your Google Classroom because that should be able to date and timestamp that you did that. You know, I mean, they turned in work. There it is. You can pull it. If you want to be like overly cautious, and I will tell you this: if there is different guidance that comes out today at 4:30, follow that guidance. But this is from the mouth of Sharon Peck. So, and when that woman retires, what are we all going to do? So if they have different guidance, then y'all got to change that and whatever. But if you want something that is like super trackable, if you have Google, or you could maybe use SurveyMonkey too. I don't know if they have this, but Google's forms have a date and time stamp. And so if as part of your, you know, daily check-in, you wanted to create a Google form, and when you make one, you can just keep copying it and changing the date, and do that for every day, then boom, there's your attendance. And then we are entering that attendance then into our JMC or your Skyward or whatever you have. And so teachers are still being expected at our seat-based program to be taking daily attendance. What we're allowing them to do is have that be a lag. So instead of entering attendance for Monday on Monday, they'll be entering attendance for Monday on Tuesday, because we're giving the kids that full 24-hour period to meet the daily attendance requirement. I saw earlier in the chat box that there was a question about the 15 days. I don't know if this is how this is going to go, but my guess is that statute, unless part of some governor's order changes things, that statute about attendance still applies. So 15-day drop, if they go 15 consecutive days, that will not start until 3:30. So every kid who's been, 14 days absent up until last Friday has that restart thing. In our experience as an online provider, a kid really has to work hard to get dropped. And I hope that gives you some laughter, because to completely neglect simply logging in, the kid can literally, and for a Google form, they can be doing that in bed on their phone if they're a kid who has a phone, because all of the technology is right there. So I mean, it's just such hard work to not do it, especially because what would you do normally? Think about the whole dinner party analogy is so great. And I have to give credit to Emily, and she would never take it because she's a very humble person, but she's been developing that analogy for a couple of years, and it's just now very relevant. And so it's a great time. But when we think of those equivalencies, and then the other piece is, the thing that I've always said is, okay, what's our seat-based problem? What's the online solution? So the seat-based problem that you have is the student hasn't come in the building for 2 or 3 days. What do you do at your school if a kid they haven't called, the parents haven't called? I mean, if you go 2 or 3 days without figuring that out, do you have a working secretary? Because usually you're calling, I mean, our seat-based program secretary, checks, they have to take attendance by 8 o'clock. And then if they don't, she gets a note and sends out a, robocall or whatever. You can continue to use all of those same technologies. You're just going to be on a time delay. So you have always tracked down students. I don't know. I mean, I think you have to be really, really sick or something to get 15-day dropped, or you've been kidnapped or skipped the country or something, right? In a seat-based program, because otherwise maybe a social worker's knocked on the door, and those, so you're not going to do those same kinds of things. But one of the pieces of the plan is that we're required to have is, kind of social, emotional, and that kind of piece, mental health. My suggestion as part of that has always been, this is the time when you want to contact your law enforcement people in advance. So making a phone call now, administrator, call your local law enforcement and say, if we are worried about a child because they have not logged in to our daily check-in, they're not answering the phone, those are not answering my texts, all the things that you are doing and to set up school, quote unquote, they haven't come to the drop-off area to pick up their tub for their distance learning thing, whatever that is, ask the law enforcement agency how many days before you will do a well child check. Because in my opinion, this is a concern, especially if you've had any child protection concerns with that family in the past. So be proactive during this time now, whether that's a social worker who makes that call or, those sorts of things. Find out from them what they will do to support you, because nobody wants teachers knocking on doors at the house, because what are you going to come into, right? And maybe that's been part of your typical protocol, and so if it is, follow your typical protocol, but maybe not now, because now that could potentially cause you to be breaking protocols of health, right? So let's use our health people. We're providing them with childcare at our schools, so let's use those people until something's overloaded and we're told some things to do differently. But that I think should be part of that planning.
It looks like there's a couple other attendance related questions. So there's one that says, does logging into just one class count? So in a high school setting, if they take 7 periods, but they only log in for the science class, does that still count as attending for the whole day? Okay.
So that's a great question. Erin, you just uploaded. I'll answer it first. So that depends on your county's definition of truancy. or your county's procedure for truancy. But attendance at a school is to get funding, right? Is they walk into the building and they're counted for attendance. So if they walk into your building, that virtual building, however or the distance building, however that's defined by your plan, a single walking into the building, they are at school. That attendance and truancy, people always mix these two things. Those things are actually two different things. Attendance is about funding. Truancy law is about child protection. And if you need me to provide some stuff on that, that actually used to be my thing. It gave me so much joy. I used to drive around the state going to court when I worked for Minnesota Virtual High School out of St. Paul. And we won't go into that because you don't need to care about I squirrel a lot, so sorry. But I can provide you with resources if you want that. But the point is, you'll want to connect with your truancy social workers. My guess is that there would be very little reason that anybody's going to deal with kids just because they're not coming to school because of school. The concern is going to be their safety. And so if they log in once, then they've met that, then they've met that, and you know that they're safe enough to get on their, type thing. You may have other protocols that you want to follow for safety, but for the online world, truancy pops up really fast as the first indicator of kids not being safe. Just one quick story, and it will not take long, I promise. I had a family of 5 that the oldest daughter was online and the other 4 were going to school. And we picked up the truancy fastest. All of them were truant, but we picked it up fastest and we filed. And because of that, the agency, social workers were able to get into the family's home and found out that when they looked back at the attendance records of everybody else, the kids missed every Monday. Well, they came home on Friday night and got beat up for 24 hours. And then the bruises healed and they couldn't go back to school until their bruises healed. So Tuesday or Wednesday is when they went back. So it's a whole nother aspect of this that I'm really passionate about. And another piece is, as directors, please be taking care of your staff. We're all at home alone now. You don't know who they're home alone with. And a colleague of mine was actually murdered by her husband, not at a school that I was at, but another truancy, oddly enough, a truancy social worker was murdered by her husband several years ago. And in part, I see that as a downside of her working from home, because her online program didn't require her to ever be seen by people, and except at scheduled times, and her husband would know when those scheduled times were, and he was beating her and eventually killed her. And so that, I know that's really a Debbie Downer on this, but I want to put that out there because of who you are as leadership people. Using Zoom and making people show you their face every now and then. Maybe they're just saying that they're sick, but maybe they are covered in bruises. So it's a good idea to be checking on your staff as well, which I know is just an added thing. But yeah, I will stop talking now because Emily will take us to brighter things.
Yeah, thank you for that advice. Thank you for that. Emily, you're still muted.
A good point about that social presence and communication, whether it's the daily check-in or other things, anytime you can work in social emotional pieces to your content. For me, I teach art, so it's really easy. But there are things that students will tell you, like in writing or online, that they wouldn't share in class. And so I encourage you, as you again, think about content and lessons and assignments, where you can to incorporate those wellness kind of pieces. Just back to the attendance and check-ins, that's an opportunity to make it fun too. Like it doesn't always have to be enter your name so that we receive your attendance. You know, it could be, you know, what's your favorite breakfast cereal? It can be short, right? We don't want it to be, again, overwhelming or too much work. But those are great places to add in both fun and kind of the social piece. Really, that's all that I had. I think you probably have lots of specific questions, but I'm also wondering, where are you at with needs? Like, are you able to articulate needs yet? Or are you kind of still in that overwhelmed processing stage? And if you are able to articulate needs, you know, what are those? Because I think Stacy and I, we have a lot of resources, and so we can definitely share those with you, but we want it, again, to be pertinent and not too much at one time. And we have yes, and we have friends who have resources. Just have to be time stamped or date stamped.
Okay, so in my Max meeting this morning, I think that, and because there's not been specific guidance. So if teachers keep a record of phone calls I have one staff member, and this is kind of funny. She's an online staff member, but she uses her Excel sheet. She doesn't use real Excel. She literally makes an Excel sheet on a piece of paper, and it's the same concept, but it's in a notebook because that's what helps her, and it's fine. She's great. We love her. So anyway, it does not have to be date and time stamped. I'm just saying if like you want to be in an overabundance of clarity, something like that can work, but unless there's more, unless the commissioner provides different direction, you know, follow that. But so far there has not been much direction because there's just too much direction needed. So that may change. So they, you know, you can define it, just make it be part of your plan. If it's in your plan, this is my understanding right now. If it's in your plan, then, and then there's no federal or state guidelines otherwise, then you follow your plan and you should be golden. But, you know, the minimum connections almost always are going to have something, right? So this is why if you have Google Voice, that'll be date and timed, stamped. If you, even, you know, all of those pieces, if it's a check-in answer in Google Classroom, that the record's there. You might not know how to access it right now, and maybe your technology person does, but someone out there is going to create a YouTube video to tell us how to pull that kind of data. And if not, eventually Google will be pushed to do it. I mean, and if not, take a screenshot of it. So yeah, I think that's that. Go on, Erin, tell me more questions.
Do you want to talk a little bit about, so Amy, I assume Amy H is Amy Hendrickson from ERATS. Hi, Amy. She had commented that you had shared some wisdom about essentially lean on your strengths, right? Like not everyone is going to be awesome. Like their skills may not lend themselves to being an online teacher. So sometimes you need to be in a support role. Can you talk a little bit about how you might leverage your teams to be, some of you might be presenting lessons, some of you might be responding to kids. Can you talk a little bit about what that might look like maybe some models that schools could consider so that teachers, especially once you start working from home, that they don't just feel totally siloed?
Do you want to start on that, Em, and then I can jump in if there's something I think of?
Yeah, well, I think I'm trying to think of teams. Sorry, I'm trying to think through the kind of the cognitive load piece, because I know and in some places, like there are schools where teachers just they're very individual, and planning, you know, switching to planning as a team or working as a team is going to be tough. So, you know, that might be a little more of a like down the road strategy that you start working on. You know, initially that might not fit your school or your staff. But yes, I mean, as much as teachers can collaborate and share ideas and have, you know, like share ideas for a daily check-in. Like, you know, Stacy and I worked with someone who was, you know, very, very reserved, analytical, like, very great in the content area. But, you know, that kind of fun social piece wasn't really, it like didn't come naturally to her. So I think instances where you can kind of share ideas collaboratively for like, oh, how are you thinking about this? You know, what ideas do you have here? And then, you know, maybe that analytical person can really help you plan like, oh, well, did you know that if you use this formula in Excel, it'll just do all the work for you? Who knew? So I think if there's a time, you know, that's something that I could adjust in my daily, the teacher sample schedule, which is a great thing now that I think about it, is to plan in a daily staff check-ins or staff collaboration time.
So I'm going to jump in on that just real quickly and just give you a really good example. Sorry, 2 people working at home. This is a good example of this. Sorry for the background noise and the dog. One example from our CPACE program is that we have an early adopter go-getter kindergarten teacher who has a kindergarten teacher colleague who struggles. She's awesome. I love her, but she struggles with like sending me photos by her cell phone. And so what they have done is they've put the early adopter go-getter in charge of the technology side of things. And then the other person who probably would rather color and make photocopies is thinking about materials and lists for parents, and all of these things need to get done. And so they're actually, instead of having 2 separate classes in their Google Classroom environment for kindergarten, and they do a lot of team teaching stuff too, and so yeah, but they're having a single Google Classroom. And then Emily and I are not super familiar with Google Classroom because Google Classroom didn't exist back when it would have been really great for us to have it, because my first online learning program that I worked with when I walked in had packets, and we got everything into Moodle and Class Server and all these early programs. So we're not super Google Classroomy. So find somebody else who's good at Google Classroom, like for that technology stuff. But we can figure it out. Like, I helped my husband set up his, but I just like that piece. We're not great resources, and we just want to be honest. We're awesome. And we're also honest. We want to be honest about what we can help you with. And then there's probably someone else who's better at something else. So we want them to help you, because everybody needs efficiency. But maybe you want to think about, and if Google Classroom has this ability to have sections, right? So maybe it's kindergarten with a section for teacher 1 and a section for teacher 2, but anything that is happening for everybody anyway, just have it be that way. But maybe the discussion boards are teacher 1, teacher 2. Maybe the daily check-in or circle time, or that kind of thing, is teacher 1, teacher 2. So just thinking about that. The other thing that I wanted to just talk about a little bit with that is that our specialists are not creating a separate Google Classroom environment. So like our music teacher and our PE teacher, I think this is true. A lot of ideas have been bounced around. So one idea was that instead of them creating a separate Google Classroom environment, that they were actually going to become like colleagues inside of that. So kindergarten PE, kindergarten music would all be part of this one thing, so that from the user's perspective, the younger that the student is, the less technology they need to be having as part of their barrier to learning. and also their parents, right? Because what kindergarten parent, let's be completely honest here, is allowing their kid to be as savvy on the internet? If they are, I'm worried, but as savvy on the internet as a kid who on Monday 3:30 is going to be able to step into a Google Classroom. So I noticed a question way back about, the first day. The younger the kid is, the less you schedule for the whole first week. Because on day one, you might not even be able to have anything that's whole, right? Day one, you literally might be making phone calls and saying, this is how we're doing this. Maybe you've done that by Thursday or Friday, depending on whatever. Maybe your paraprofessionals are doing that because we need to be using them as well, whatever. But on day one, you have to expect that there's going to be a trillion things that go wrong. And so figuring out what does day one look like, it's going to be difficult. Like, let's just be honest. It's going to be difficult. Not for everybody, and you will be able to anticipate probably 80% of the kids that you know of. You'll be able to guess accurately 80% of accuracy who is going to catch on fast and who isn't. And then there will be 20% that are going to surprise your socks off. And that's happened to me with teachers too. And I just didn't know everybody in our building, but and so that might be true of you too. You might not know that one of your teachers has like a YouTube channel that they're making 40 grand a year on, and they're like amazing at figuring out how to do this for you. Sorry, again, squirrel, stopping talking.
Can
sorry,
you also, sorry, Stacy, did you want to hop in on Josh's question here?
Yeah, yep. I don't know that we've been given the exact directive of when we can start contacting families. My guess is that once you have things set up, Erin, do you know more? I think once you have things set up, of course, let's communicate.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, it's pretty clear that no instruction is supposed to be happening. So like, I would say not even instruction about how to use the stuff. Like if you are going to be doing the onboarding for how to use Google Classroom, how to use Zoom, how to use any of these tools, I think that's all supposed to happen starting March 30th. But it's pretty clear that no distance learning is supposed to happen before March 30th. What we've been hearing from the commissioner is they've essentially given you 8 days to build a brand new, revolutionary, never before seen in Minnesota school system for thousands of students. And 8 days is not enough time, right? Like you should be using every single second of that to be planning, figuring out every single thing that could go right and go wrong. And so, yeah, I think maybe sending out communication is probably fine, but the actual teaching and using the resources, that's not actually supposed to start until the 30th. So they want to make sure that you're super laser focused on getting the pieces in place for you to be successful once the 30th rolls around. Because I think they're anticipating at least 8 weeks of closures beginning March 30th. At least that's the Q&A that was updated yesterday. That's sort of what they're thinking. And I've heard as long as the end of the school year. So, we don't know for sure, but I think we have to be prepared for whatever is to come. So, and Stacy says that every person who has the secret distance learning email account should email and ask that question, which should be all school leaders. So I have another question for Emily. Could you talk a little bit about how to support parents through this? Because we are definitely asking a lot of parents. And when parents enroll their students in an online learning program, they're sort of opting into that role of becoming the support, right? They're choosing to be the paraprofessional in that setting. This is being thrust upon them by the governor and the commissioner of education. So how might we support parents to help their students, and whether they want to or not?
Yeah, the whether they want to or not portion. I think being realistic about what we can expect from students and families. That's not to say to set the bar really low, but I think, you know, choosing um, choosing learning strategies and lessons and assignments that students can, um, you know, can do without their parents' help when we can, you know, and you know, obviously, again, like first graders, you know, they can't really write yet or read, and so that's going to look different for different age groups. But I think Stacy might be the better person to answer that, because I think we need to be really understanding, and the most important thing we're going to do is to maintain a relationship with families and students. If you know, if we're not seeing them for 8 weeks, you know, in person, you know, yes, meeting learning objectives is important and essential, but before we can do that, we need to be doing what we can to be patient with each other and support those relationships. So I know that's not specific. Stacy, do you have any? I mean, Stacy deals more with parents than I do, so.
Yeah, so I think that the more you can lay out and be clear about what the expectations are going to be, that is really helpful. Like, keep in mind, you know, like, I know Emily has 2 kiddos at home, and so even our own staff requirements of each other, you know, that we got to think about. We really need to think about how can we simplify things, and then using paraprofessional staff. There's a possibility that, you know, you just might have to use them to support kids as well, to really, I mean, for your IEPs, your paras are still paras. And the service that they provided, whether that was one-to-one or in a group setting, you have to figure out how that works. Because the parents are not suddenly on the IEP as the para. That does not happen in online learning. And if it does, in my opinion, it should be illegal. Because that's not what it is. A paraprofessional is supposed to be trained and supported by a special education teacher to be able to provide the services as directed by the IEP. So unless a parent is on a school payroll, they should not be considered paraprofessional for IEP students. So take that or leave it, and there's no definition.
And I was
of
using
that.
the term, I was using paraprofessional as sort of like a general, like,
yeah, no, I know, but I just wanted to be
right, like
really
not
clear.
An actual, right.
Yeah, because, and I will never name names because that's just bad news, but I know of an online program that does that. And those families are not on payroll and they are not on the IEP. They just take off the paraprofessional support. So if you had paraprofessional support before you came to that online program, you suddenly have a parent. That's just wrong. So and tell your SPED people this too, like, that's not good. That should not be how this happens. Unless your SPED director is saying that now it's suddenly okay, because that shouldn't be. But anyway, but yeah, and I think that goes to where Emily was talking about, you know, expecting less and less synchronous is in parents. The more we expect of parents, the less that they may be able to actually meet that expectation. Whereas if you say to them, you know, you normally help out. So think about it this way. What do you expect out of your parents right now? And then think about that analogy. So if you expect your parents right now to help with homework after school, then they should continue to help with homework after school. But all of a sudden, the kids just aren't in school all day first. And I will tell you this much. Kids who are in online learning have way less homework. Why? Because we don't send homework sheets home, and we don't they're not, you know what I mean? because all of it's happening. It's all, I mean, it's not homework, right? It's all just expected. So be thinking about that, like what's expected. So a kid who used to take an extra hour in math is still going to take an extra hour in math. Think about how you're going to support that kid. Are you currently doing that with a teacher or some other support, after school help, parent? Try and figure that out. How did we used to do it? Now, how do we do it? And just think about when and how it happened. And then it might mean that parents have to step up a little bit. But I also know I'm seeing nationwide as schools, we're stepping down. Not that we're not doing our job. What I shouldn't say stepping down. We are ramping down, okay? Because this is going to take so much more emotional toll on kids than we can actually predict, because of just these 2 weeks off has created so much fear and uncertainty. And you have no idea, although you can probably guess, what parents are saying at home. And I've heard from some of my kids. I know what's being said. And I almost made a child protection report the other day, just based on what parents are talking about at home while we're closed. So think about that. And when you know, we've all been doing social, emotional, and ACEs and all of those things. Okay, so all that training now trauma has happened on a worldwide scale. How ready are they going to be to learn? And just keep that, and how are parents who maybe, you know, lots of things, but all the things that everybody's facing, right? That's real. And so then if the teacher can't help and the parent can't help, then what are we doing next, you know? So, okay, sorry.
No, so I sorry to jump in. I'm saying this, I can just write it down too, but I think that's one of the pieces of our plans. That first week of contact is connecting with families and finding out what capacity they have and what resources do they have. Like, can you know, a para have a phone call or a video chat with your, you know, student each day? Is that something you can arrange or not? I think, you know, this has happened to families and they haven't yet had a chance to say, I think to us as educators in schools, this is what we're struggling with. This is what we're most worried about. We don't know, you know, we know that they're thinking those things. We might hear them anecdotally, but they haven't had a chance to, right, come back and talk with us. So I think, you know, as we think about our plans and that first, again, you know, first week, it's like the first week of school, not a whole lot of specific math learning objectives are going to happen. That's a really important piece.
So Emily, there was a question a little farther up about things to consider if you are one-to-one staff-student video calls. Like when you're in the building, you don't typically have staff and students one-to-one without being with someone else around. Are there considerations if you are online similarly? Like if it's an online interaction?
Right, yeah, no, that's a great question. That isn't something that we have, sorry, okay, look at that later. I think there are a couple of options. It really depends on what resources the school has. Google Hangouts or Google Meet now allows you to record. So those could all be recorded. It also records the chat. So basically, you know, everything is recorded. So while someone isn't there, it could be checked on. You know, obviously you can have more than one person in a Google Hangout or a video chat if that's a concern.
I can just tell you what we do and what's probably happening around the online learning community is that we're using all the online tools, and kids and teachers are having those one-to-one conversations all the time. One of the things that we've always done is require that our staff are never friends with any student on social media, because while a teacher would probably not use school given, Google Meet or whatever, to have an inappropriate, meaning physically inappropriate over the internet, relationship with a student, that does very frequently happen in Snapchat, because of it being erased and that sort of thing. And so making a social media policy and having all of your teachers unfriend any friends that they have that are students. Our policy is the student has to be 18 and graduated or 18 and no longer attending the school, is kind of how our policy is. And I think, nope, that's not in that student handbook that we shared, but I think I can share that with you if you need me to, but you can figure it out. And then, like Emily said, the recorded, if you want everybody to be recorded, I think it will be very barring to, I don't think that we should be planning on people being able to be in the building for the long haul, because that's not what I'm seeing around the nation. And so, or the country, I should use the word correctly, around the country. And so planning for what if everyone is sent home, because lots of places are doing that already. And Minnesota right now is actually kind of on the weird end of the spectrum with having staff reporting and that sort of thing, except for certain exceptions. So I can see, Josh, why. I mean, that's really great because you're caring for kids. I just don't think that's going to be sustainable long term. And then that would mean that your distance learning plan should probably not rely on one-to-one video for the long term. So we just be thinking about like step 1, step 2, like for now, if we're allowed in the building, this is how this goes. If you're not in the building, and then we're not in the building long term. And the unfortunate thing is that will change your ability to deliver instruction, and you'll probably have to kind of ramp down and go to like packets, because you won't be able to do this kind of interaction, and like helping kids in these kinds of ways.
I want to just go back to something to make sure it was clear. A couple of people had talked about being on spring break and then this 2 weeks, and so families won't hear from them for 3 weeks. But that the understanding is there's no instruction during this time, but by all means, reach out to families, to say, we're working on this. Teachers can, send an email or, something, light, friendly, not instruction related. Those kinds of communications are fine. Oh, go ahead.
It looks like Josh has a question about what to do about grades and credits. Do you have any guidance there? Yeah, because you guys have a high school. You're 512.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So we've currently not received any guidance from the commissioner about a long-term plan for credits and grades. I wish someone would do it. I used to work at the department, and there were a lot of us working there, but so that would be great. For now, you should, in my opinion, strip down your curriculum to the bare bones required by standards and benchmarks, and just think about not extending learning. And so standards and benchmarks, you could, in your distance learning plan, choose to do pass-fail. I don't think any university or college in the world would be misunderstanding of that. And then that's up to you. I'm not sure. That's not a required bullet in your distance learning plan, so that could be an internal policy. Erin, do you have any other thoughts on that? I don't want to misspeak from and like say something that as our authorizer, you have other thoughts on that. maybe it's just a wait and see thing.
Yeah, and you know, charter schools are independent school districts. We want to respect our schools' autonomy, and we know that you each bring really unique needs based on the programs that you have and the kids that you serve, and the ways that you've been doing business. If I had an answer, I would give it, but I don't. You know, I think if you have had some experience, I would respect that. You know, if
Yeah.
pass fail seems
Yeah.
like it's the best way to go about it right now, then
Yeah. So the other thing I will
we got to go with
say,
that.
I lived in Grand Forks, North Dakota during the 1990, or I didn't live there, my family did, my parents did, during the 1997 flood. And the way that the Grand Forks schools and I believe the University of North Dakota handled that, because that was like everybody had to leave town. There were like 5% of the population left, or stayed. Everybody else was gone for like 3, 5, 7 weeks, something like that, and then came back to their houses being destroyed. And so I know for a fact that people graduated. And so one of the things that I said in a different meeting recently was what would make sense to me, because obviously if a kid's a year and a half behind and they're a senior, you probably are like, well, they shouldn't get to just graduate because they're a senior, because the Minnesota way that is to keep pushing kids all the way till they're a senior, and then they're a super senior for 3 years, and then they age out. So it doesn't seem fair to just let those kids who are behind graduate. I could hear somebody saying that. And so what would seem to be reasonable to me is if a student was on track to graduate on March, whatever that day was, because it's seriously such a blur, let's say March 17th, 16th, if they were on track prior to that day to graduate, then maybe they graduate, you know, but we don't tell them that right now, but that I could see that happening. Don't worry, this video won't be publicly posted anywhere, because maybe that's the most reasonable thing to do. But let's keep educating kids with the expectation that they do well and that they connect as to the best of their abilities. But I mean, University of Minnesota Duluth already canceled graduation, and I mean, like kids who are student teaching aren't going to be able to student teach anymore, and all of those kinds of things. If that's happening up at that level, at the K-12 level, I see us doing some, I mean, I think the kids will still graduate, right? But they won't be having so yeah. I think the biggest thing is to think about reasonable, right? What's reasonable? And then also one checkpoint for me is always, if this is me, and some of you are in this situation, if I'm the teacher, I mean, if I'm the parent and I have a job, which you do, what can I do, right? So those are some of those reasonable questions in my situation. How can this work? I think it's great. And use your colleagues to brainstorm in some of those pieces, like what's reasonable for you? I don't have any children at home, but I'm worried about my adult children and what's going on with them. What's reasonable for me? You know, that kind of thing.
Okay, well, I think we need to wrap up. I want to thank you two so much for your very generous time and wisdom and knowledge and expertise this morning. It was so helpful to all of us. This was really incredible. I learned a lot, and I think everybody else did too. To those of you on the call, I will follow up with an email to school leaders and board chairs with the recording of this webinar, and I'll ask them to pass it forward to all of you. Again, thank you so much for participating. I shared the information in the chat about the 2 that are tomorrow, so I'm hoping that if those are relevant to you, you will also participate. And keep reaching out if you have questions. We're happy to connect and try and find all the answers that we can and do the best job that we can continuing to serve students as long as this goes on. So thank you so much, Stacy and Emily. I can't thank you enough. So grateful.
Thank you, and we are here
Thank you
resources.
guys. And
All right.
I apologize. My voice is not normally this, like, I feel like I'm a communist dictator.
Well, we're glad that you're here. Thank you so much. Bye, everybody.